Where you headed?
Just up the road a little ways. Can I get a ride?
Get in.
Thanks.
While visiting relatives in Kentucky as a 13-year-old youngster, Bill Balfour plus his dad and his uncle drove over to Mammoth Cave. Balfour was particularly fascinated by the Rotunda and begged the adults for another commercial tour. But having had enough fun for one day, Bill's father allowed his boy to go on another guided trip that same afternoon while Dad waited outside. Bill was entranced and soon bought each book about caves that he could find. He also lobbied for stops at any show caves that the family passed during their assorted travels. During spring break in 1968, Bill Balfour and a friend did a productive trip to West Virginia, operating out of Bill's 1963 Volkswagen Beetle. They entered the Lips entrance to Orkin Cave and climbed at Seneca Rocks. With topographic maps and a copy of William Davies' classic Caverns of West Virginia in hand, the team was also able to locate Cass, Culverson Creek, Schoolhouse, and other great caves. West Virginia now firmly in his heart, Balfour began his long association with the West Virginia Association for Cave Studies, WVACS, and with the West Virginia Speleological Survey, WVASS. A prominent figure in both WVACS and WVASS for decades, Bill has surveyed in several of the extensive contact caves in Greenbrier County, co-authored a pair of WVASS bulletins, computerized the West Virginia Cave Database, and has served as president, chairman of the board, and a director of WVACS. In addition, Balfour has been the executive director and the Greenbrier County director for WVASS. As an aspiring architect at the initial explosion of his caving career, Bill could draw. As such, he became extremely interested in surveying and was only too glad to keep book, do the in-cave sketching, and draft the resulting map. His output is voluminous, several hundred maps of caves, both large and small. Recalling the most productive part of his caving career, Bill Balfour estimates that perhaps 90% of his trips were involved with surveying. One of Bill's favorite locations is the Culverson Creek cave system. The historic entrance to this cavern is located near the tiny community of Eunice, West Virginia. Balfour jokes that he became so enchanted with Eunice that he bought the town. In fact, Bill does own a beautiful farm in the area, and each year many cavers park on his property while visiting Culverson Creek. A short walk from his house is what is now known as the Balfour Hinkle Eunice entrance to the cave, and Bill owns that too. And across the way is the Wildcat entrance to Culverson Creek.
Hi, I'm Bill Balfour. Welcome to the 2020 West Virginia Convention. Kind of abbreviated, but you know, that's the way it is. And I'm sitting out here in what we call downtown Eunice, and I'm the de facto mayor of this big city. There's all of, 3 or 4 people living here in this area. So, you know, I get the job of being the mayor. And I can see the cows coming up behind over here, so come some of my constituents. Just a little bit about me. I was born in Kentucky, and I lived in Pennsylvania and in Ohio, kind of went to high school in Ohio and went to college at Ohio University. But while I was in Ohio, that's kind of where my interest in caves came. When I was about 13 years old, my parents went to visit my aunt and uncle that lived down in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. And my dad and I and my uncle were kind of bored one afternoon, and my mom and my aunt, of course, they were just yakking and having a good time. So trying to figure out something to do, and I noticed on the map that Mammoth Cave wasn't very far away. So I persuaded my dad to take me down to Mammoth Cave. So my uncle and my dad, we jumped in the car and we drove about 45, 50 miles down to Mammoth Cave. And I had never been in a cave before. I didn't know anything about it, but just thought it would be something neat to do on a hot day. Well, when we went down into the entrance on the historic tour, I just could not believe my eyes. I was really just kind of blown away with what I saw. And by the time we got into the Rotunda, my eyes were this big, you know, because it was just amazing. I had never seen anything like this before. I was dumbfounded. And throughout the entire tour, I was just awestruck as to what was going on and why the cave was like this and everything. So we came back out after the first tour and, you know, milling around in the gift shop, and I started begging them to let us go on another tour. The Frozen Niagara tour was going to leave in 30 minutes or something like that, and I really would like to see that. Well, my dad and my uncle had had enough of the cave for one day, but they agreed to let me, you know, go on my own with the tour and see while they waited for me outside. So I did, and here again I was just blown away by the whole thing. It was just really fascinating to me. So after that, I had, you know, anytime we would go anywhere, if we were going by a commercial cave along our travels, I had to stop. We had to stop. I had to go in the commercial cave. I had to go see what it looked like. Whether they wanted to go with me or not, I had to go. And they, you know, they let me do that. That was kind of nice of them. So I got to see commercial caves in Tennessee and Kentucky and Missouri and Indiana. You know, just everywhere we went, I was able to see caves. When I turned 16, I got my driver's license. And so my first thoughts are, well, I want to go caving, wild caving. You know, I had bought every book I could possibly find on caves and caving. And I thought, well, you know, this is great. I want to do this. So I bought a Comfo cap hard hat at a mining supply store there just outside of Athens, and they had carbide lights. I bought a carbide light, and I bought a big sack of carbide, and I was ready to go. I came home in the evening, figured out how to put the carbide in and what to do with it, and when it got dark in the garage, I fired it up and looked at the flame and everything, and I said, ooh, this is going to be cool. This is good. I like this. So eventually I persuaded one of my neighbors, friend of mine, my best friend down the street, to go with me, to go see what we could get into. And the closest caves that were around to Athens, Ohio, were down in Carter County, Kentucky. So, you know, off we went. I borrowed my parents' car, and we took off and went down to Carter County, and went to Carter Cave State Park, and you know, wandered in just wanting to know something about caves, and the girl at the gift shop directed me upstairs to talk to the new cave naturalist at the park, a fellow named John Tierney. And John Tierney was invaluable. He knew a lot about the caves in the area. He hadn't been there very long. He just, but he's quite knowledgeable, and you know, he told us, well, you can go over here to Bat Cave and see that. It's a nice cave. So that's what we did. We went over and went all through Bat Cave, and it was one of those trips where you could go in the main entrance and come out a back entrance, which we found, and that was kind of neat. And so I developed a good relationship with John over the years, and unfortunately I saw earlier this year, in this winter, that he had passed away, and that's too bad. He was a really fine person. But at any rate, I would persuade whoever I could get to come down to Carter County with me to go caving. So by the time I got into college in 1966, there was an alpine club there at OU, and so I kind of checked out to see if there was anybody that would be interested in going caving, and I was able to hook up with a couple people, and so I took them down to Carter County, and we looked at all kinds of caves in the area. So I spent a couple years just playing in Carter County. But of course, my main interest, of course, was Mammoth Cave. I really wanted to see Mammoth Cave more. So I found out all about CRF, and the powers to be in CRF were up at Ohio State at the time, and so I got in contact with them and got invited to go to Mammoth Cave. And so I took 2 or 3 trips down to Mammoth Cave with CRF, but it was like a 7-hour drive by the time I left Athens, maybe even 8, till you got down there, and just going down there for a 15 or 20-hour cave trip and then having to drive 8 hours back. That was just kind of, I don't know. It was tough. It was tough, even a young guy like me. But I also was interested a little bit in West Virginia, because I had gotten a copy of Davies, and it had all kinds of information about the caves in West Virginia. And I looked on the map and realized that that's a whole lot shorter to go down to West Virginia than it is to traipse all the way down to Mammoth Cave, or down to Pulaski County and Sloan's Valley and stuff, where I'd been caving most of the time. So I looked in the book, and there was a whole lot of new stuff looked like being found. I was particularly interested in Ludington's cave that was written up by John Rutherford, and so I wrote John a letter asking about information on Ludington's and Oregon and some of the other caves. Well, I didn't hear anything back, but I decided that I would go down on a spring break and just do a trip into West Virginia for a week and see what I could come up with. So I again conned one of my geology classmates into going with me, a guy named Mark Cole. He was from Portsmouth. And so at any rate, we jumped in my 63 black Volkswagen and drove down to Lewisburg from there. And it took like 3.5 hours, which was, there wasn't any interstates or anything like that. So it was still a good drive. We got into Lewisburg and got the book out and said, let's what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? All right, this one sounds like we can find it pretty easily. So we went to the Lips entrance to Oregon Cave, and we spent several hours in there. We found the cave with no problem, of course, and then we went in there and enjoyed the trip. We got all the way down to Hell's Fissure and looked over the big pit and said, well, I guess that's it for us, because we didn't have any ropes or anything like that. And so at any rate, came back and spent the night in an old hotel there in town, and then the next day we decided that we would look at some more caves around in Greenbrier County, and one of the caves that sounded like it would be a nice cave to look at was a cave called Hinkle Eunice Cave. And so at any rate, we drove out here, and it was pretty easy to find. It was right beside the road, and the road is right up here. And this is the Hinkle Eunice, the old Hinkle Eunice entrance. It's kind of interesting because that was, you know, almost 50 years ago, and little did I know that this cave would be on my farm one day, that I would own this cave. So at any rate, we took a good look at it, and then we moved on. We drove up and looked at Snedeker's. Basically, this trip was just kind of a recon to see what West Virginia had to offer. We got some information from a local person who knew somebody that was a caver up at Greenbank. So he'd given us that name, and so we went up to Greenbank and tracked down Michael Ballister, and that's Philip's dad, needless to say. And we sat in his office and talked with him, and he was very nice, and he said he'd just opened up a new cave, and he told us where it was and how to get to it and all this other stuff. So we thought, yeah, let's do that, you know. So it was a cave called Dill Cave, and of course it was quite wet and, you know, nasty, but we took a good look at it. We looked at some of the other caves along back Allegheny Mountain, and then we said, well, all right, now let's go find the Cass Cave. It has a big waterfall. Maybe we can, you know, bop in and at least look at the waterfall. We weren't, here again, we didn't have any ropes or anything, so we weren't vertically prepared. And I wasn't all that competent with vertical stuff at that time. I had been, I'd been trained down in Carter County by the one and only Sarah Corey. And, you know, had seen her with a bunch of people on the bridge there going into the park. She was teaching people, so we had stopped and said hello and who we were, and you know, a couple hours later she was pushing me off a 110-foot cliff. But that's another story. But at any rate, we showed up at Cass, and there was all kinds of, it looked like a big circus going on right there. Lots of people there, lots of vehicles, and all kinds of things. And it turns out we got there just in time to see them bring out somebody from the Pittsburgh Explorers Club who had been stuck in the waterfall. And it was, you know, a big rescue that was going on, and it was just ending as we got there. And so we, you know, talked a little bit to some of the people and everything, and made the decision that, no, probably not a good idea to go into Cass today, needless to say. So from there we, you know, headed on north, got up around Seneca Rocks and camped up there. Like to froze to death because this was in March, and I think the temperature got down to about 10, and I had a, you know, $15 sleeping bag and a $10 sleeping, or $15 tent and $10 sleeping bag. So I froze to death the whole night, and of course couldn't get in the car to warm up either because it was a Volkswagen. There's no heat in a Volkswagen, you know, unless you're running at 60 miles an hour. So, at any rate, and we had a visit by a bear, you know, just the typical West Virginia stuff. But the next day we got up and decided we'd check out Germany Valley and take a look at it. And so, you know, we drove around, we found Hell Hole, of course we saw Schoolhouse, and, you know, I'm busy marking my map showing where things are. And then, you know, in the afternoon we decided, well, you know, we got a few hours to kill, why don't we climb Seneca Rocks? So we did. We went up the backside though, and got up to the gun sight notch and said, okay, well, that's good enough for that. A nice view. And then, you know, by that time the week was basically over with, so we headed on back to Ohio. And I had fond memories of that. You know, that was a good trip. I enjoyed it, even though it did freeze to death a couple nights, but we had a good time. And a week or two after I got back, I got a letter from John Rutherford from WVACS. And he told me that, you know, WVACS was not in the guide business, and that, you know, they wouldn't be giving any information on caves to anybody, but you know, I had written to him that I was a geologist, you know, or working on my geology degree. So he wrote back and he said, but we are doing lots of research, and, you know, if you'd be interested in coming down to Greenbrier County sometime, you know, to work on a project or something like that, you know, we always welcome new folks who are interested in helping WVACS achieve its goals. And he left his phone number and everything, and so I gave him a call and talked to him, and you know, told him I would be interested in coming down. And so he hooked me up with some cavers in Parkersburg, which was about 40 miles away from Athens. And I got in contact with them. You know, once school was out that summer, I got in contact with them, and they were going to go down the next weekend for a caving trip, you know, with WVACS. And so, you know, they invited me to come along. So I thought, well, okay, I can drive over to Parkersburg, and I'll just ride down with them. So I got over to Parkersburg. They told me how to get there, to their house and everything. And there were two guys that lived right beside each other, were two of the cavers, and another guy lived down the street a little ways, so they were all pretty close. And the guy that was going to be driving, a guy named Del Province, and his next door neighbor was a guy named Bill Bauman, and then there was another guy named Jim Paquette. But they were all heavily involved with WVACS, and they would go down every month and go caving. So at any rate, I got there about 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and introduced myself, and seemed like they were nice guys and everything. I looked at Dell's big van that he was driving. It was kind of interesting. He didn't have the standard bumpers on it. He had railroad ties. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. I wonder, railroad ties. And I asked him about it. He said, well, you know, we take the van some places where it comes in handy. So I kind of let it go at that, you know. At any rate, we got loaded up, and away we went, and had gotten down through Charleston. We stopped someplace there and grabbed a sandwich, and then we started on out Route 60. I had not gone Route 60 to Lewisburg. I had gone to Beckley and down. I had never been on Route 60. So we started up the mountain there, just outside of Anstead and Golly Bridge, and Dell is driving. Bill Bauman is sitting in the passenger seat, and I'm in the back seat with Jim. Well, Bauman's drinking beer. Dell is too. Dell's got his foot up on the dash, driving like this, you know, and joking and laughing. And we're swinging out around all these sharp curves and everything, and just kind of hanging out on the edge. And I finally looked over, and I could see lights way down below, you know, like 1,000 feet below me. And we're just hanging out along on these curves, and I went, oh my God, what? Oh geez, if we go off the edge, we're dead, you know, because it was dark, and I didn't know how far. It looked really, really far down. At any rate, we finally wound up in Lewisburg and went up to what was called the WVACS Field House, and it was just an old farmhouse back behind another farmhouse, we pulled in, we parked at this barn, and then we had to carry all of our stuff out to a cow pasture for about 150 yards or so, I guess. And then there was just this old 2-story house that was sitting there, basically dilapidated, but it had a coal-fired stove, and that was the only heat. And they did have one sink that would actually run water, but that was basically it. It was pretty Spartan. But the next day, there were a whole bunch of other folks there, and I got to meet John Rutherford and a few of the other folks. And so the next day, the guys that I came down with were going to McClung's Cave to survey a virgin passage off of a drop. And so, that sounded like, since I was with them, I would just go with them and see. So at any rate, went into McClung's and, bounced down the canyon. I was a little leery of the canyon first time in because my boots were kind of slick, and these guys had golf spikes on, so they just, trundled right through the canyon with no problem. I'm sliding and holding on for dear life. But I made it, and we got on out. First breakdown up through the gate and out out to the G Trail. And it's about a 2-hour jaunt from the entrance out there. And you go out this passage for, I don't know, we probably have about 1,000 feet out the G Trail, and there's this little trickle stream that's running down in the middle of the passage. Just cut a little canyon, 3 or 4 feet deep, and then all of a sudden it just, there's a hole in the middle of the passage, and the water just cascades over, a little waterfall, and the big passage just keeps on going past that, but that was not the objective. We were going down the pit to see what it was. So we had a cable ladder with us, and rigged the cable ladder down the pit, and realized, of course, that water was roaring right down the cable ladder. So what to do? Well, Bauman said, you know what, we could probably just go up this passage here a little bit and make some little dams across this and hold the water back. We could climb down and it'd be dry. That sounded like a good idea. So we set up, the 4 of us started building these little dams across the passage. There's plenty of mud and rock and stuff. And sure enough, we got the water stopped, and then, climbed down the pit, dry, no problems whatsoever. So we got that done and wound up down there 3 or 4 hours surveying some nice virgin cave and some not so nice virgin cave. But we got it surveyed until it pretty much got too gruesome. So then we came back to the drop. By that time, of course, the water had overflowed those little dams and was, coming right down the ladder. And so it was one of those moments, what are we going to do? Well, Bill Bauman said, I will make the sacrifice. He said, I will climb the ladder in the waterfall, and I will fix the dams, and you guys can climb dry. We thought that was a good idea. We thought that was a good idea until Bill decided that he was going to climb. He didn't want to get his clothes wet either, so he was going to climb nude. Okay? So Bill took all of his clothes off except for his helmet and light and his boots. And I held the ladder while Bill started up. And I looked up one time, and all I could see were cheeks going, and oh my God, was it, and he was, of course, screaming because the water was cold, and he climbed that 25 feet as fast as he could do it. And I was holding, like I said, I was holding the ladder, and I was laughing so hard, I just couldn't help it. At any rate, he made it up to the top, and he went about, fixing the dams. He was about 10 minutes or so, and he said, "Okay, I think I got the water stopped." And, the water did slow up, and then it basically did kind of almost stop. There was still a little drip. So I got on the ladder, and I climbed on up. I brought his clothes up in my pack, and Jim Paquette came up next. And then Dell was the last one to come up. And, Dell and Bill were, best of buds. I mean, they lived next door and everything. And so they were always kidding around with each other. It had been that way forever, I guess. So Dell's coming up, and he gets about 10 feet from the lip, and Bill starts kicking the dams through. And he says, "Dell, you better hurry, the dams are overflowing." And just as Dell got to the top, the first wave of water hit him right in the face and just soaked him. Bill was just laughing like crazy. He could not help himself. He just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. Oh, we all did, actually, Dell didn't seem to think it was all that funny. But at any rate, that was just the way it was. Well, that was my first introduction to WVACS. We went back to the field station, drank beer after that. And that was my first, like I said, first introduction to WVACS. And these people were good cavers, and they got a lot done, but they also were a lot of fun to be around. And that was the important thing for me. I always wanted to, I didn't want to be in some kind of real serious situation. I always liked to have people that would have a good time. I like to be a part of that kind of thing. So, at any rate, I decided that WVACS was probably a good place to call home. And so after that, I started coming down to WVACS just about every month, and I got to meet all kinds of interesting characters. Bob Hanley and Phil Lucas and Cliff Lindsay, Bob Amundsen. There were just a number of folks that were, showing up regularly, and we were doing lots of good stuff. One of the people that I met through WVACS was a guy named Bill Jones, and he's one of the other luminary speakers this time around. But at any rate, I liked Bill. He seemed to be a pretty good guy. He was a hydrologist, and he was living up in Fairmont, I think, at the time. But at any rate, he was down, and so we got interested. He was going to go to a Friends of the Karst meeting down at Mammoth Cave, I believe, or Bowling Green. Can't really remember for sure. But at any rate, I decided that I would go along too, and so we went down there, and a well-attended little meeting and everything. But we met a character that just kept us in stitches the entire time. He was just a real goofball, but he was he'd gotten his doctorate in geology, and had just started teaching at Murray State, and this was John Milroy. And he was so much fun that we just had a ball with him. And a few months later, I was working out in southern Illinois on a drilling project. I worked at that time. I worked for Gulf Oil, and so I was working on a project out there. And I had a weekend free, so I called John up and said, "You got any caves you want to go do or do anything? You want to go caving this weekend?" Because I wasn't that far from Murray. And he said, "Hey, yeah, come on down. Actually, I got a whole bunch of folks coming in. We're going to do this and that cave," and I don't remember what cave it was, but yeah, come on, you can stay here. And I said, "Oh, okay." So I drove down to John's. He told me how to get to his house and everything. Met his wife, Joni, and then the rest of the crews hooked up with us, and off we went caving. Well, in that group were, I don't remember who all, that many people that were in it, but I do remember that Don Schaufstall from Evansville was there, and Rain Curl was there. And maybe Rain's, I don't remember exactly who all else was there, but there was a bunch of us. So we'd gone and we did this cave, and it was a typical Western Kentucky sinkhole cave, you know, lots of big passage, but lots of water also. And then we came back and we're going to have dinner at John's house. Well, we had Joni had fixed all kinds of spaghetti. She had a big spaghetti dinner for us. And there was a big table, and we were all sitting around this table. There's probably 7 or 8 of us, I guess. And, you know, eating spaghetti and laughing and joking. And, of course, there was some beer flowing. And Joan had on a football jersey, okay? And it was number 12 on it. And, you know, you could see that Rain wanted to say something, and so he finally did. He asked Joan, and, you know, Joan is just the sweetest, most innocent-looking little blonde girl you ever saw in your life, you know, at that time. We all know better now, but at any rate, Rain said, "Joan, is there any significance to the number 12? And Joan got this big smile on her face, and she said, "Why, yes, Rain, I'm glad you asked. There is. It's really all for John's benefit." And Rain kind of looked at her puzzled, and then she said, "This is the number 1 boob, and this is the number 2 boob." Rain's mouth went like this. Schaufstall started laughing so hard he almost fell out of his chair. Milroy did fall out of his chair and on the floor, and I'm laughing too. And Rain just didn't know what to say. He just, oh my. Oh. And it was, you know, that was it. I mean, I've enjoyed Milroy ever since. I mean, he and Joan have been great folks. One of the guys that I did a lot of caving with at WVACS was a fellow named Phil Lucas, and he here again, he's one of the Luminary speakers this year too. And I guess we were 3 amigos. But he invited me in the early 70s to come down on a Thanksgiving weekend to a thing called Dirty Old Man's, DOM. It was down in Lee County, Virginia. He said, a bunch of us go down there, and you know, we stay in a motel, and we go caving during the day. Lots of interesting caves down there. And, you know, we come back, and stay in a motel, and drink beer, and swap lives. And so I thought, well, you know, I could probably do that. That sounds like fun. So I went down to DOM the first time, and there were, you know, a whole new cast of characters down there. A fellow named John Holsinger was in charge of the thing, and the first time I met him, Dr. Holsinger, or affectionately known as Captain Karst, and a fellow named Roy Powers, local guy there, and, you know, a guy from over in Tennessee named George Titcomb, and there was just a whole bunch of interesting folks there that I had never, you know, met before. But anyway, we had a good time, and we were surveying lots of different caves. One of the major ones was a cave called Unthanks, so that was, I took lots and lots of trips into Unthanks over the years. but I became really fond of John Holsinger. He was a character, and I enjoyed being around him, and we developed a good friendship, and he was always fun to be with, because you could kid him and he would give it right back to you, even though he was a well-known, biologist, very respected in his field, in cave biology. He was just a ball to be around too. And he had all kinds of geological theories too that he was always expounding on, and he would bounce them off of me, and I'd tell him he was full of crap, but he didn't care. But there's an area down there called Rye Cove, and it's over in Scott County, Virginia. And John had been poking around over there because, some neat biology to begin with. That was what got him over there to begin with. But there were also some pretty neat caves and some, substantially large caves. And based on the geology, Rye Cove was a big synclinal trough, and John was sure that, out here on the edges where all these caves were, that if we were able to go on in, we would eventually find a master trunk going down the middle of the syncline, and it would lead to miles and miles and miles of huge caves, And so he was always talking about the Rye Cove trunk and how we needed to get into it. What did we need to get into it, everything. Well, he said, one of the things we need to do is probably look at some of these caves that I was into back years ago. And he had published a book called Descriptions of Virginia Caves, and there were some maps and stuff in there that he had made of some of the caves in Rye Cove. Well, he wanted to remap Pond Cave. He thought that was a good candidate because it had a huge passage in it that, there might be something to it. So he kind of talked me into leading a survey trip into Pond Cave. And so I recruited some folks to go with me. I had met another geologist from Bluefield who had come down with me, a guy named Clay Stowers, and there was a girl from Lewisburg who was one of John's students at ODU. She had graduated, but she was teaching school at Lewisburg, and her name was Sandy Van Leeuwenhoek, and another guy named John Taylor. So, at any rate, we, it was the day we were going to do it. Of course, it was pouring the rain, just pouring the rain, and John kind of put his finger on a map. Holsinger did put his finger on it. It's out here. He said, actually, what we'll do is we're going out to look at another thing. I'll take you out here where the cave's at, and show you exactly where to park and all this other stuff. I said, okay, great. So we followed John and Lucas and Roy Powers. They were all in one car. We followed them out there, out this little gravel road, and stopped, and John got out, stoked his pipe up, and he pointed down over the hill. He said, "It's in a sinkhole down over there." And I had known John long enough to know that his sense of direction was not usually that good. And I said, "John, take us down there and show us where the entrance is." I said, "We're not going to do it unless you do it." And grumble, grumble, And so he put his raincoat on, and we climbed the fence and down over the hill we went. It was pasture land, you know, but it's just pouring the rain. And we come to this big sink, big high wall there. He said, "See, right there. It's exactly where I told you it was. Right there." "Okay, John. All right. All right." So we bent back up the cars, and they took off, went off to wherever they were going, and the rest of us suited up. And we, you know, got down to the sink, and it was one of these sinks where, you know, there was a high wall on one side, but you could walk down, you know, but it was all undergrowth and brush and stuff. So I said to Clay, I said, let's take a station up here at the top, and then we'll shoot down to the entrance from there, and then we'll go on into the cave. That way we'll get a you know, an idea of how deep the sink is, etc. So, you know, we set up the first shot. Clay went all the way down to the, you know, bottom of the cliff face, and shot the shot. I recorded the data, and I came on down, and I said, I looked around, and I said, "Well, where's it go from here?" And he says, "I don't know. I don't see any place to go. There's no cave here." I went, "What? No cave? But Holsinger, I could see myself getting mad, needless to say. And, you know, Clay was very right. There was absolutely no cave there. There was not even a hint of a hole at the bottom of this sink. So we decided that maybe John had messed up again. Wasn't uncommon. So we came back out, and we spent the next 45 minutes wandering around in the pastures checking sinks, and it's still pouring rain. We were absolutely completely soaked. Get off of me, ant. And so finally we came to this sink, and there's this kind of open air big pit right there. And you know, well, this must be it. Of course, it was 2,000 feet from the other place that we had where John had told us was. But at any rate, you know, it kind of matched the description, and there was a climb down to get into the entrance and everything. And good thing we had a little piece of rope with us, because it came in handy, because all of the rain had made everything just as slick as it could be. I mean, it was just unbelievably slick. But we got down into the cave, and, you know, very quickly said, okay, this is Pond Cave. This, you know, we had the old map with us, so we knew what we were looking at. And it just dropped down into a big trunk and went both ways. So we took off surveying to the right, and, you know, we're gone a couple hours and got that section completely surveyed. And then we turned around and came back to the entrance and started down the left-hand side, and then all of a sudden there was this smell emanating from the darkness on up. And after a station or two, we found why it was smelly. There was about 5 big bloated cows, dead, just in all, maggots, everything. It was horrible. And it was just, you know, we wound up having to survey through this stuff, because they basically almost filled the passage with these dead cows. I don't know how they got down there for sure, whether they, when they fell down the pit, they tumbled that way, or what the deal was. But at any rate, they were there. And it was just, the smell was just nauseating, you know. We were wet, sloppy, and then the smell, And so at any rate, we went on past them, and, you know, a couple hundred feet, the whole passage just terminated in big breakdown. And so we basically remapped the cave and you know, put in a lot more detail than Holsinger's old map, but didn't really find anything new. But then we had to, of course, we came out and had to crawl back across the bloated cows and up the slick rope, or up the slick slope to get out. and it's still pouring the rain. We got back to the cars and got in and, you know, got changed and got back to the motel. And, you know, it had been just one of those days, you know, just everything had gone kind of wrong. We got what we were supposed to do accomplished, but, you know, it was after the fact because everything had just been a disaster. And especially the fact that John had sent us on a wild goose chase. And so we were sitting around in the motel trying to figure out what to do. And I was deviously thinking, what can I do to get back at Holsinger for this? So I schemed and I said, the Rye Cove Master Trunk. So I said, I got my survey book out and I quickly started adding some more survey to it on the next page. Like, we found a way through the breakdown there at the end, surveyed 3 or 4 shots through and popped up into big going trunk again. And it went for a couple 300 feet like that, and then the whole thing just opened into blackness, just gigantic blackness, and we couldn't see the floor, we could barely see the ceiling. It must have been at least a 150-foot drop to get down to the floor, blah, 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 and I'm sitting there making up all this nice data, you know, adding the shots and sketching it in. And I got done and I showed everybody, and everybody was, yeah, that'll work. And I said, okay, now nobody can say anything, you know, we're gonna get him. So about a half hour later, here they came, you know, Holsinger and Lucas and Roy Powers. And so at any rate, John wanted to know how the trip went. I said, well, John, we had a good trip. We had a very good trip. Got everything surveyed, and you won't believe, I think we finally, you know, we may have found your master trunk. He said, what? And I said, yeah, we may have got it. And I said, I think we're pretty sure we did. And he said, no. I said, well, you know, if you go to the left down there, and you know how the passage ended in a big breakdown? He said, yeah, I know that. I said, well, we poked around in there, and we found a little hole down through the breakdown, and John Taylor was able to squeeze down around, and he said, you know, I feel air, it goes. So we, you know, poked around some more and actually, you know, found passage and got through this breakdown. And on the other side, the big passage that we were in continued. He said, really? I said, yep. And it went a couple 300 feet and boom, it just fell out. I mean, there was just nothing but blackness. He said, oh, I don't believe that at all. Got his pipe out, started, you know, getting ready to smoke pipe. I said, John, here's the survey date. Take a look. And he looks at the book. He sees my sketch and everything, and then he turns the page and he sees this little sketch going out into this big passage and then this big drop. And his eyes got this big around. And he just went, oh my God, I can't believe it. It's there. It's there. Lucas was looking at the map and looking at the stuff. Roy Powers was scratching his head, you know. And I said, yep, it's there. Clay's over there in the corner going, you know, trying to contain himself, of course. But at any rate, we let that go on for the rest of the evening. And John was so excited. He was just ecstatic. And he, you know, his whole DOM was made because we had found this master trunk. The next day at breakfast, we confessed that we had made up all of this to spite him for sending us off on a wild goose chase to an area where there wasn't a cave, and what a miserable trip we'd had, blah blah blah. John didn't really want to speak to me after that for about 3 days. He was so pissed. I mean, Lucas just laughed. He knew that I had pulled one on Holsinger so bad that it would go down in the history of DOM. So, well, as you can see, we have changed localities. Here in West Virginia, once in a while it rains, and it came up real quick, so we just said, okay, we're out of here. So we're sitting in my sunroom in downtown Eunice now. So I was about to tell you a little bit about the West Virginia Speleological Survey, WVASS. I got involved with that early on also, and when I was living in the DC area, Paul Stevens and a couple of other people talked me into computerizing the data, the cave data for West Virginia, put it on a computer. I knew nothing about a computer whatsoever, but they had a computer, and they gave me a computer, and they said, here, it's got 20 megabyte hard drive. That should be enough. And I said, okay, well. So I set to work on putting all of the caves in a database on RBase, I guess it was. And then I maintained that for ever and ever and ever. I wound up being the executive director for WVASS for about 25 years until I finally found a sucker to take it over for me. Thank you, George Dasher. But at any rate, Paul got me started working on a database, and he was very instrumental in doing that. And of course, WVASS has put out several publications. I think we're on number 24, 25, something like that. I've co-authored 3 of them with George Dasher, and I'm working on another one with Cliff Lindsay right now. About 1975, Phil Lucas and Bill Royster decided that they needed to resurvey Culverson Creek Cave, and so I was one of the first ones that they recruited to help them out, and we got a survey started, and it was about every month we'd go in somewhere in Culverson and do a survey, and we started racking up the resurvey mileage and finding a lot more cave than had been found on the the 1950s version map that was available at the time, and so it was kind of fun to do that. And one of the first things that we were working in was Fuller's Cave, and Fuller's is now owned by Cliff Lindsay. So we have a caver owner who's done a lot of work in the cave himself. He actually owns that entrance. It's kind of interesting because this particular cave is now pretty much wrapped up with cave owners. I own one of the entrances. Cliff owns a couple entrances. The West Virginia Cave Conservancy owns Wildcat Entrance, which is the most popular entrance to go into, and so that's worked out pretty nicely. But at any rate, there's the Wildcat, one of the Wildcat entrances that you have to go down through to get into the main part of Culverson Creek. And when you get down in there, it gets pretty big, needless to say. So it's a nice cave. It's the premier water cave in the state of West Virginia, although there's another cave that's vying for that honor now, I think, but that's another story. It's a fun cave. It's a fun cave in the summertime, let's put it that way. In the wintertime, you don't want to be in there because the water's really, really cold, and it's usually a lot higher than this. Plus, it can flood. I'll show there's some examples. I got a couple more pictures of some flooding. This is a place called the Hairy Place, and it's not really that hairy, but it, you know, you've got to be careful there. To get down on the other side, you have to go across a little ledge, and you don't want to fall in the 12-foot deep water if you can avoid it. This is a picture of the balcony room where you're coming in from the Wildcat Entrance, and this is dropping down into the Overflow Tube. And this is typically what the Fuller Stream Passage looks like. It's a nice big canyon, places up to 100 feet high, and meanders along, and it's a couple of miles long, and got lots of water on it. The whole cave has lots of water. But it's a beautiful passage. You know, it's got some nice formations, and it's an enjoyable trip. This is basically underneath where we are sitting right now. Underneath my house, 97 feet down, is the Overflow Tube, and it's a big passage. It's up to 50 feet high in places. And those are logs lodged in the ceiling. So the cave does flood pretty good. But, you know, I go down and clean the logs out once in a while so that people get through. In 2016, we had a 1,000-year flood in the Culverson Basin. Well, all of southern Greenbrier County basically had a 1,000-year flood. It rained something like 10 inches in about 8 hours. And needless to say, everything flooded big time. 27 people here in Greenbrier County died that day because of flooding. It was a pretty catastrophic event. But it also made Culverson Creek very interesting. This is the lake that's backed up in front of the Culverson entrance where the water goes in. And this lake was about 50 feet deep, 60 feet deep, something like that. And it was backed up the valley for well over 2 miles and covered a bridge, the Fort Donnelly Bridge, which is about 1.5 miles back up the valley. It was under 25 feet of water. This is the Wildcat Entrance. There's the WVCC kiosk. There, the entrance is down there by the little cliff face, and it is under 20 feet of water. That entire sinkhole is completely flooded. We had never, ever witnessed water in the bottom of that sinkhole, nor coming out the entrance or anything. You know, that never, since cavers had known the cave, had we ever seen anything like this. We had put a pipe in the one side of the Wildcat entrance. There's 2 entrances right side by side. We'd put a pipe in one side because the side that we had dug open, we wanted to keep it stabilized and you know, make sure that it'd never fall back in on us. We wouldn't have to dig it out again. Well, the flood just popped the pipe out like it was a, you know, straw. No problem at all. When the water started going down a day or two later, water was coming out of the pipe entrance and flowing into the old main Wildcat entrance. In 2004, I basically retired from having 8 to 5 job. I got tired of driving back and forth to Beckley, and because that was like a 54-mile one-way ride to work, and so felt sufficient enough that I was able to just go ahead and say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. But, you know, I didn't want to sit around twiddling my thumbs, so Will Orndorff and Virginia DCR had a part-time position open, and he put it out on the VPI cave list survey and said, you know, looking for a little help. And so I called him up. I said, hey, I might be willing to you know, help you out. And he said, great, that's great. So I went to work for the Virginia DCR as a, you know, cave specialist or whatever, part-time, something to do. And I did that for about, 7 or 8 years, I guess, something like that. Actually, I think maybe I'm still on the payroll, but I haven't done anything in several years. But I don't think they've ever taken me off the payroll. I haven't gotten any money out of it, but that's okay too. But at any rate, Will had all kinds of interesting things going on, from bat banding to isopod collecting to doing a bunch of hydrology work, just you name it, mapping caves, whatever. And as you can see, Will is quite the character. He and I had some great times together, and saw a lot of interesting caves. And I did some hydrology work down in Scott County. And one of the caves that I was interested in was turned out to be a little spur cave, where, you know, the water sank in one side of the hill and came popping out on the other side, and it turned out to be, you know, it didn't take very long for the dye to get through. So I had dumped the dye in the entrance of the cave and walked around the other side of the hill, and, you know, about 30 minutes later, oops, here comes the dye. I realized fairly quickly that I had actually used a little bit too much dye. I didn't mean to do that. And I actually colored the water green for about 6 or 7 miles down this creek until it hit the Clinch River. Needless to say, I had to go down through there and tell people, don't worry about the green water, it's just something that the state's doing. And Bill Jones would be proud of this, I'm sure. But at any rate, I did a lot of hydrology work. Towards the end, the state started acquiring a bunch of property in the Cedars area down in Lee County for natural preserve areas. And so they wanted to do a karst inventory of what they had. And, you know, they've got thousands of acres down there. And the Cedars is a very interesting place because basically all it is cedar trees and bare rock limestone outcrop and sinkholes. And you can stand in 2 sinkholes at one time easily. But there are also all kinds of caves and pits and stuff. I think we, over a couple of years, we found over 100 new caves within, you know, a couple 3 square miles of Cedars. It was not uncommon to go out and find, you know, 8 or 10 caves a day when we were down there working. And I always seemed to have all kinds of volunteers that would help me, you know, experts actually. Here's Monk and Marion. You know, good help's hard to find. So, looking at one of the little finds that we found, and another find. I never did find Marion a 100-foot pit down there. The best one I could find was a 60, I think it was 62 feet. But he was quite happy to go down it. So, at any rate, I'm still, dabbling in karst work. I'm working for one of my old companies that I used to work for when I lived down in the Blacksburg area. Right now, about 4 or 5 years ago, I got hired on to. They got the karst contract for a major pipeline project, and so Mike Futrell worked for the company, and of course I had worked for the company at one time, and so they called me up and said, we need some help. Would you be interested? And I said, oh, of course I'd be interested. So Mike and I have been wandering around in West Virginia and Virginia, inspecting the right-of-way and documenting caves and karst features, et cetera, just basically to keep the pipeline company from, screwing up anything. And so far, so good. We've been very successful. And of course, we've worked with Will and the state on this also. So it all comes around in a big circle. So what am I going to do now that I'm 72 years old now, and I'm slowing down, needless to say. And I'm still going to play around doing some karst consulting. I'm still going to map some caves here and there, but I'm not going to be able to do any major long trips like the guy that's filming this, Dave Saki. He's still a youngster, though. I'm still going to survey some caves, when I can. And, whether it's whatever it is, I'll be up to doing it. And I just can't do, these super long trips like I used to be able to do because I'm, like I said, I'm 72 years old. Doug Medville basically has a good idea. And a few years ago, I got to go out to Hawaii to see what his good idea was. And it's surveying lava tubes. And I enjoyed that. That was a whole lot of fun. And we surveyed a whole lot of cave while I was out there. And if I could, I'd retire out there because that's kind of what it looks like. Well, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks. And we'll see you at the next convention, hopefully. Bye.